We're coming to get our check.
First, my brothers and my sisters, B1, salute to every single last one of you guys. Welcome to Afro Elite channel. I'm your host, Afro Elite. Before we get started, please make sure that you guys hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that share button, hit all of that stuff. This is the first live of the month, and we're starting this month off very good, very powerful. So please make sure that you guys do that. We already got a number of people already in here. So salute to every single last one of you guys. Thank you guys for that, for being here. This is going to be very educational. I am very excited to bring this to you all this evening, tonight. This, Lord have mercy. Okay, people call me all the time. Very excited. Okay. So before we get started with that, I want to let you guys know I got rid of the computer issues. I got the new piece. I put the new piece in, so we should be good to go. We should be good to go. There should be no problems. I tested it. Everything's fine. No problems whatsoever. None at all. All right. So I put this too, before we get started. I know I said that a couple times. I put this under the Reparations playlist on my YouTube playlist because I got that clip of me talking about reparations in City Hall, and I'm going to tie that into this. So that's going to be at the end. So make sure that you guys stick to the end so I can play that clip for you guys. Now, I play this because of this. Now, shout out to the person who sent this to me, who tagged this to me on Twitter. All right. Because I didn't see this until she tagged this to me. Now, as we understand, I'm going to preference this. As we understand, Chicago is having a invasion of what they call asylum seekers, of migrants. Chicago is having a crazy amount of them. All right. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the comparison of them coming over here, them fleeing their countries, coming over here. They're trying to make that comparison with what happened with us in our foundational Black American history of the Great Migration. So let's play this clip, and then we got to do a lot of thorough breakdowns. All right.
People are fleeing their country and seeking sanctuary in a city that was founded by a Haitian immigrant, that was established as a sanctuary city from our first Black mayor, Harold Washington, that welcomed individuals from all over the globe and continues to do so, including from our southern states, the Great Migration, which established the Black middle class here in Chicago from 1916 to 1970. Our city has been sanctuary to many and will continue to be sanctuary to many. We are in a humanitarian crisis. And just to respond to the question about...
Okay. Let's get that off. Let's get this off. All right. The first thing that we got to discuss, the very first thing that we have to discuss, shout out to every single last person up in here, is the fact that they're trying to use the Great Migration. They're trying to use our history to justify them fleeing. I've developed 5 points, these 5 key points that separate what the Great Migration was and what fleeing actually is. Because what they're doing is fleeing. The Great Migration was not that. So with these 5 points, and we're going to be very thorough, we're going to break everything down. We're going to use historic reference to discuss how that's not the same thing. Because what they're doing is they say, hey, you can't really be mad at us. We're doing the same thing y'all did. You know, so if y'all did it, if it's cool with y'all, it should be cool with us. That's what they're trying to do. And they're trying to make some type of commonality of what they're doing and what our ancestors have done. So the very first thing that I want to kind of discuss a little bit is Jean Baptist, his name is very long. Jean DeSable. This is the black man who discovered Chicago. Okay, he discovered Chicago, and a lot of people associate him with being Haitian because his last name is French, and at the time, France owned Haiti. So people are like, okay, well, he must have been Haitian. So let's look into this because it's not a solid fact that he was Haitian rather than he just had a Haitian last name. So when we look into this, a lot of people don't understand that Haiti had colonies in America for a very long time. It says, now let's look into this because a lot of people say he's Haitian only because his last name is French and they associate France with Haiti. So let's look into this though. It says as early as 1699, when Pierre Lamond de Prevailly, his name, whatever, first began to develop the French colony in Louisiana. There was a French colony in Louisiana. This is after slavery. They say slavery started in Virginia in 1619. So this was years after slavery. France had a colony in the country of what we know now as the United States of America in the state of Louisiana. All right. He pensioned to the king to allow slavery expedition to the west coast of Africa to procure captive laborers. Although the first cargo of enslaved Africans did not arrive in Louisiana until 1719, a census of the colony in 1708 counted 80 Indian men. These are Native, when they say Indian, you know what they mean, Native American, which is us, foundational Black American, Indian men and women held as slaves among the total population of 278 between 1719 and 1731, when the Company of the Indies was in charge of the economic development of Louisiana. The company's ships landed more than 6,000 Africans who were sold into slavery. The French instituted the Code Noir, a set of laws that was supposed to ensure the well-being of the enslaved workers while keeping them under control. But the laws were, let me scroll down a little bit, But the laws were, where was it? We keep them under control, but the laws were frequently ignored by owners of the enslaved people. So we're going to, and I'm not going to go too much into that, but I just want to get that out the way because they say a lot of, well, you know, he was Haitian and they use that tie. But the thing is that just because he had a Haitian last name does not necessarily, or not a Haitian last name, a French last name, doesn't mean he was Haitian. I just read to you guys, and they don't tell this story, that there was different European countries that had colonies in America. All of this was prior to the Revolutionary War, which was 1776. So there was colonies owned by France in America. So you had foundational Black Americans, the enslaved Black people who built the country, who had French last names. Now, this is history. Either it's 100% true, which it is, or it's not true at all. So did France own Haiti? Did they own a lot of slaves in Haiti? Yes, they did. But they did own some in America too. So when you say things like, okay, he was Haitian just because his last name was France, you're omitting the fact that there are foundational Black Americans at the time who did have French last names because of France owning a colony in Louisiana. All right, so we got to be very, very clear with that, with the history of that, because they like to tie in other ethnic groups of people, and we can't do that. Now, I'm going to bring up some of the points that she made about the Great Migration and what they're doing, which is called fleeing. All right. So point number one, actually, I want to get this off the screen. So that point number one was that slavery built the entire country, not only the South. A lot of people undertell how significant slavery was to the entire country. Slavery was all over the country. It was not just in the South. It wasn't just in Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, the Carolinas. Slavery was all over the place. So we're going to look up some history about how slavery was not only building other places in the North, slavery was a essential part of the North for a long period of time. Pulling this up. Shout out to, I'll get to your super chat in just a minute. Now, there's a lot to read here. So if I don't read the entire article, then I'm only reading the bits and pieces necessary to make these key points. All right. It says, right here at the top. I know the font is small, but I'm going to just read along if you can. If you don't want to, it's okay. I'm doing it. When discussing slavery in Dutch New York, I am often asked why so little of the history is taught in schools or at historic sites. Most Americans knew very little about U.S. slavery or that it extended far beyond the southern cotton plantations. The U.S. North is often portrayed as a safe haven for enslaved foreigners, when in reality, New York did not abolish slavery fully until 1827, only 33 years before the Civil War began. So when people make it seem like the North was some type of huge safe haven for enslaved Black people coming out of the South, that's inaccurate, okay? The New York City, which was a free state, not even a whole generation before slavery ended nationally anyway. It didn't end in only 34 years. So that means New York had slavery. New York was one of the biggest slave states for hundreds of years, all right? So let's be very, very clear with that. Now I'm going to go down a little bit right up to here. Well, we can talk about some of the things that they developed. Some of the things that they developed here. Wait, let me see. I gotta scroll. Okay, it's right. Was it right here? Okay, yeah, right here. I scrolled past it. It was small. I'm sorry. Now it says Dutch slavery in New York began not long after the first Africans were brought to Virginia in 1619. As early as 1628, the Dutch West India Company put enslaved Africans to work in its colonies from New Netherland, some of them laboring in chain gangs. Let me show you guys a picture of the chain gangs. Now, when you look up chain gangs in history, they'll say things like chain gangs were established after the Civil War for prisoners. Chain gangs were not for prisoners. Chain gangs is what they put a lot of enslaved Black people in to prevent them from running away. This is a picture of some of the chain gangs. If you guys know about old cartoons, you'll see a lot of the old cartoons, what they call prisoners would be wearing black and white. They would be wearing white shirts and pants with black stripes going across from the top to the bottom. And a lot of times they would be having anchors or chains strapped to their ankle to prevent them from running away. You see that in a lot of cartoons. But this is what they had the slaves wearing, because they wanted to have them wearing different clothes to distinguish them from other people. So it would be easier if they did try to run away to find them. They wore clothes to pretty much be able to be easily spotted. You couldn't really hide wearing all white with black stripes on it. You couldn't blend into anything. You would stick out like a sore thumb. That's why they would have those things. They would have that uniform. If you can see at the bottom, it says this is a picture taken from 1898. So chain gangs have always been a thing, especially when large amounts of slaves were out building or constructing different buildings or building the railroads and things like that. They didn't want them to be all like, okay, you're very far from the plantation, then we got to do something so you don't just break off. You know what I'm saying? So this is why they developed the chain gangs, and it was very implemented in New York. So getting back to the article right here, let me see, where was I? Okay. It says in 1664, the Dutch lost the colony to the English. But it was not y'all, the end of slavery or Dutch in slave holding in the region. So even though they lost the colony, the Dutch still had slaves in that region. In fact, the number of individuals who relied on the labor of enslaved peoples increased during the 18th century. With this expansion of slavery came more emphasis on limiting the movements and activities of enslaved New Yorkers. Though legislation white New Yorkers prohibited enslaved people to trade, travel, or purchase alcohol without permission. Within their homes, New Yorkers enslavers restricted the people they enslaved to back rooms, cellars, attics, and garret spaces, like putting them in the attics and the basements and all that stuff, essentially. And all of these spaces, enslavers use systems to control necessary to hold people in bondage. So, we have to be very, very clear about the history of New York and about the history of the slavery in these places. All right. Now, New York's not it. There's other places that we're going to talk about, because we have to make the point that slavery was not just something that was confined to the South. Slavery's in, the cotton fields and everything like that. Slavery was all over the place. Even in places that didn't have big plantations, they were still using enslaved people, because those were still the people who were building, the roads, the buildings, all of that stuff. So we have to be very clear about the history with that. So let me bring up the next thing. There's so much stuff. It's taking a little bit of time. I'm not going to read this whole thing. Let me zoom out a little bit. I'm not going to read this entire thing. But just enough to make the point. Y'all, this is going to be a very, very, very educational live. If you guys can drop that like button, leave that thumbs up, I would tremendously appreciate it. It says, New York was preeminently been the capital of American liberty, the freest city in the nation, its largest, most diverse, most economically ambitious, and its most open to the world. It was also excuse me. Let me take a sip of water. I'm reading a little bit too fast because we got a lot of stuff to cover. Paradoxically, for more than 2 centuries, the capital, y'all, not just the state, the capital of American slavery. As many as 20% of the colonial New Yorkers were enslaved Africans. 20%, that's not a small number. First Dutch, then the English merchants built the city's local economy largely around supplying ships for trade in slave and in what slaves produced, which was sugar, tobacco, indigo, coffee, chocolate, and ultimately cotton. If you guys know about slavery, cotton was really one of the last things. In slavery, they were in sugar, they were getting sugar cane, they were shipping tobacco, all of these other things prior to cotton. Once they started shipping cotton, and once cotton did that, especially after the cotton gin, that's when cotton like completely took off. Okay. And and they were still, getting tobacco and all that, but cotton took off, and cotton was what they call cotton was king. Cotton took off way bigger. It was huger than everything else. It eclipsed all of the other things that the slaves were doing. All right. But that was kind of later on. But before, they were using sugar, tobacco, and all that stuff. Okay. So it continues to say, New York ship captains and merchants bought and sold slaves along the coast of Africa and in the taverns of their own city. Almost every, not some, not a little bit, not a couple, not a handful, almost every businessman in the 18th century New York had a stake at one time, or at one excuse me, at one time or another in the traffic of human beings. That means that even if they didn't own slaves, because what they'll like to do is they'll like to say things like, oh, well, only a few people own slaves. They didn't really own slaves. Even if they didn't own slaves, what they all benefited, they all had a stake in it. They were all like, okay, I got this ship, you're using my ship to get the slaves, you're using my storage places to get this, you're using my business to make the chains, to make the clothes. Almost all of them in New York were tied to slavery in some way or another. All right. And then it continues to say, during the colonial period, 41% of the city's households had slaves. That's almost half, y'all, of all of the households in the city, compared to 6% in Philadelphia and 2% in Boston. Only Charlottesville, Charleston, South Carolina, rivaled New York in the extent to which slavery penetrated everyday life. So the only place at that time that beat New York when it came to slavery was really South Carolina. There was a tremendous amount of slaves, tremendous amount of slave work, and all of that stuff in South Carolina. That's the only place that even somewhat rivaled New York at that point in time. All right. So this is the history that they're not trying to let you know, because what they'll like to do is they'll pretend that the South was all bad. It was just bad, bad, bad. But the North, New York freed the slaves, and New York was a free state and everything like that. But the thing is that New York was just as much into slavery as anywhere else. In fact, when you actually look at the details of history, New York was far more involved in slavery than a lot of these other places, especially prior to cotton. All right. So that's very important history that we have to know. And I'm saying this to show you that all of these places, not just the South, but the entire country, New York, benefited from slavery. And we're not going to stop there. We got a lot more to cover. All right. Where was I? I got to read. To be sure, every slave holding New Yorker usually owned one or two persons. All right. That's that every slaveholder, there's not just one or two, like damn. All right. It continues to say, in the urban landscape, there were no plantations. Slaves slept in cellars and attics of townhouses or above farmhouse kitchens in the countryside. They did virtually all of the work of many households, bringing in firewood, the water, the food, cleaning the house and clothing, removing waste. They were vital to the work of early craftsmen and manufacturers, and many became skilled artisans themselves. They said became skilled artisans, and and that's the whole, we didn't know anything until slavery. A lot of them already knew that, okay? Anyway, and they performed almost all of the heavy labor of building New York's infrastructure. So when people say things like, slavery was in the plantations, that part is true, but they They tell half truths because just because New York didn't have big plantations of cotton fields and stuff like that does not mean New York did not get its establishment and foundation from slavery. It very much so did. It continues to say slaves constructed Fort Armidsdale and its successor along the Battery. They built the wall from which Wall Street gets its name. So the enslaved built Wall Street. Okay. They built the roads, the docks, and most of the important buildings of the early city. The first city hall, the first Dutch and English churches, Franciscan's Tavern, the city prison, and hospitals. Okay. So all of these things, Amsterdam, I said Amsterdam. Okay. I mispronounced that. All of these things were built by the enslaved black people. All right. These things were not done just in the South. And this is the very most important part. The very first point that we're bringing up is that slavery was not only a Southern thing. They're making it seem like slavery was like in a different country and America didn't have slaves. You know, the South and the North were working hand in hand when it came to slavery. We're going to read this next part and then we're going to move on. Okay. Slavery was no milder. That means no lighter, no more lenient, no more nothing. Was no milder in the urban North than in the deep South. Instances of abusive treatment permeated public and personal records. The city's common council passed one restrictive law after another. Forbidding blacks from owning property or bequeathing it to their children. Forbidding them to congregate at night or in groups larger than 3. So the South, a lot of people contribute that law to the South where black people pretty much can't get together and black people can't get together in numbers larger than 3, or they can't get together at night. A lot of that was in the South, but it was also in New York as well too. So if they saw if they saw 3 black people, 4 black people together, and they were just talking, it doesn't matter what they were talking about, they had to break up because you couldn't be just talking to a group of black people. Okay. It continues to say, requiring them to carry lanterns after dark and to maintain and to remain south of what is now Worth Street, threatening the most severe punishment, even death, for theft, arson, or conspiracy to revolt, and carrying out these punishments brutally and publicly at the time. So a lot of black people were getting buck broken in New York. Buck breaking was not just a thing in Mississippi. It was not just a thing in Louisiana. It wasn't just a thing in Arkansas or the Carolinas. Buck breaking was in everywhere there were slaves. All right. So we're going to move past that because there's still much more we have to talk about, and we're bringing this up to discuss the fact that slavery. Let me bring my laptop closer. My laptop's all the way far away from me. We're bringing the thing that slavery, okay, was a part of the entire country. Slavery was not just a part of the South; it was a part of the whole country. So our people built the entire nation. So we didn't go to another place that our people didn't build. Our people built the whole nation. That's point number 1. But we still got more to cover with that. We still got a lot more to cover with that, with this whole thing. Because after this is going to be the definitive broadcast that's going to clear up the lie that slavery, that we left the South to free ourselves from slavery. We're going to clear that all the way up. There's not going to be any more lives when it comes to this. All right. Now, let me go. This is Detroit. Let me circle through. There was slavery. If you guys didn't know, there was slavery in Detroit. Okay. One piece of the Detroit narrative is often exempt from the telling of history is that of slavery. Although Detroit, or the North in general, is often perceived to have abolished and free of slaves, slavery indeed played a role in the city's history. Captive indigenous and African people contributed to the early development of the city. It is likely that slaves were among the first group of Catholic brought to settle Detroit in 1701, and that their labor was used to plant the first crops. Slave labor was crucial for the city's construction. Black slaves provided the labor for the fur trade, and indigenous women were exploited for sex. Okay. So Detroit, yeah, it's Detroit too, not just New York. A lot of people don't know about that in Detroit. A lot of people do not know about that in Detroit. Detroit had slaves too, and the slaves were the foundation of Detroit. That's something that does not get talked about nearly enough. All right. It says, from Detroit's establishment to Michigan's gain in statehood, the ownership of slaves was dynamic. Slaveholders included merchants, farmers, political leaders, priests, and others who held power within the society. All of these people, the farmers, the merchants, the political leaders, priests, all that had slaves in that time. All right. It continues to say, partly due to the inadequate documentation, the story of slavery in Detroit is incomplete and unknown by many. It's unknown by many because they don't really want to tell the truth. But anyway, there is nearly no record of the direct words of Detroit slaves. But there are, hold on, let me move my laptop a little bit. But there were some surviving records of slavery in the journals, wills, and financial accounts of slaveholders. Few scholarly work have been written about the role slavery played in Detroit and Michigan, and not produced any sorry, got a text, any full-length narratives of slavery. So slavery was in Detroit, y'all, not just New York. So when we say things like slavery built the country, slavery did 100% build the country. It wasn't just in New York. It wasn't just in any of these small in the South. All right. Let me get to the super chat before I forget. Shout out to the $10 super sticker from YMC double C 23. I appreciate it. Thank you so very, very much. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the contribution. All right. Now, something else you guys probably didn't know that we're going to be discussing soon. How deep does the rabbit hole go? We're going to discuss it if I can find it. Hold on. Where is it? I got so much stuff pulled up, y'all. Somewhere here. Oh, here it is, right here. Okay. Early Chicago slavery. For those who don't know, didn't understand, was unaware, there was slavery in Chicago. There was slavery in New York. There was slavery in Detroit. And there was slavery for a bit of time in Chicago. Maybe not as long as New York, but there was. So let's look into this. So when we say slavery built the entire country, we literally mean the entire country. All right. It says slavery has a long and complex history in the state of Illinois. The practice was first brought to the Midwest by French explorers in the mid-1700s and became well established in the region. It was later prohibited in lands covered by the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which included the future state of Illinois. But the ordinance fell short of ending slavery because it allowed residents to retain all possessions, including slaves. So from the mid 70s, when they discovered the state in the Chicago and everything like that, they had that. Okay. So what the thing was that even in 1787, the ordinance was all like, okay, this isn't a slave state, but if you're coming from the South, if a slave owner was coming from Tennessee or whatever the case is, and coming to Chicago and have proof that he bought his slave to Chicago, he was able to keep his slave. So it was like a little loophole that they were allowed to keep slaves in these in Illinois and in Chicago. And check this out. In 1818, that's when Illinois became a state. In 1818, Illinois was admitted into the Union as a, quote, free state, but slavery continued and free blacks were oppressed by a series of restrictive state laws that detained them from fundamental freedoms. These Illinois black laws, also known as black codes, were observed from 1819 to 1865. In 1865, that's when the that's when the 13th Amendment was established. Okay, that was the end of slavery nationally. So all of the black laws had to end. But so you guys know, ever since they established the city, and the city was founded in 1780 by the black man, all right, John DeSable, who we already discussed, could have more than likely been a foundation black American. If we're going to be very honest about the history, we've already discussed that. But the thing with that is that even with the ordinance, they still had slave labor. And then even when Illinois became a state in the Union, and it was a quote unquote free state in 1818, they still essentially had its own Jim Crow. They pretty much had its own laws, and we're going to discuss those now. It says, under these laws, blacks could not vote, testify, or bring suit against whites. So no matter what a white person did to a black person, the white person was completely allowed to get away with that, because the black person could not. It was illegal. It was completely illegal to testify against a white person. Okay, this was one of the things that America did. The quote unquote free states did. This happened in Chicago. This happened in Louisiana. This happened in other places where slavery was quote unquote abolished in those states. But white people were able to bring slaves and make black people do enslaved labor, and they couldn't get in trouble for it because that would require the slave to testify against the white man, and that was illegal to do. So it was a lot of little loopholes that were going around that enabled slave owners to keep slaves throughout the entire United States of America. All right. So we have to understand this history. It says grouping together. This is gather in groups of 3 or more. See, gather groups of 3 or more right here. The same thing happened in New York, was happening in Chicago. It pretty much no black people allowed at all. You were not allowed to gather in any more groups of 3. 3 or more, that's it. Okay, y'all got to separate. It says gather groups of 3 or more without risk of being jailed or beaten, and could not serve in the militia, and thus were unable to own or bear arms. Blacks living in the state were required to obtain and carry a certificate of freedom. Otherwise, they were presumed to be slaves. So if a black person pretty much didn't have their certificate of freedom, they were anybody could say, hey, that's my slave, and you would essentially be a slave. You literally like a ID. Black people literally had to carry their certificate of freedom like an ID. Okay, the Illinois Constitution, if you guys didn't know, some states have their own constitutions, or all states have their own constitutions. There's a national constitution and the other constitution. All right. The Illinois Constitution also allowed indentured servant servitude at the salt mines in southern Illinois. The mines provided significant income for the state and served as an American presence in what the United States government considered valuable frontier tyranny. All right, so we understand that. So a lot of the blacks, when they say indentured servitude, they technically mean slavery. They essentially mean slavery. So a lot of blacks were slaves in Illinois. They were just being shipped to the southern part of Illinois where they were working in the salt mines. All right, because the state of Illinois was making a lot of money in the salt mines. All right. We're also going to discuss some other things. Now, when we talk about even the railroads that were built, when I find it, I got a lot of stuff pulled up here. Nah, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. Okay, this is it. Don't know why it's not showing up. Okay. Now, I showed you guys a picture of the chain gang. I showed you guys a picture of that because that's how they built the railroads. All right. When you go through and you look here, this is the first railroad in America. First railroad in North America, the Baltimore and Iowa, was chartered by Baltimore merchants. Okay, this was all the way in 1827. The railroads were very significant in America. Okay, then you had passenger railroads 3 years later, and then you had the U.S. mail being carried in the railroads in 1831. That was incredibly significant, and we're going to get to that in a later point. So that's literally part one of the 5 parts of why the Great Migration was completely different from the from fleeing. Okay, that's literally part 1. So we're going to move on to part 2, which is right here. Okay, the Great Migration was still under the U.S. government. All right. So when I say the Great Migration, that's part 2. When I say the Great Migration was still under the U.S. government, I mean the Great Migration didn't extend to Canada. The Great Migration didn't extend to Mexico or any of these other places. The Great Migration was literally this right here. Okay, this is the map of what the Great Migration was. As you can see, the Great Migration, these arrows were pointing from the south. These arrows were not pointing to Mexico, and these arrows were not pointing to Canada. Okay, you can see in Mississippi, and my family, where some of my family is from Mississippi and Arkansas and a lot of other places, Texas, a lot of other places. So as you can see with the Great Migration, a lot of it was up into Chicago, Detroit, some in Indianapolis, others in New York, Philadelphia, all of these other places. And then you even had some going to San Francisco and Los Angeles and Portland. Okay. In Denver, Colorado. If you look at all of these points, these destinations, this is where you see a lot of black people. In other areas in America, you don't really see those many black people. Black people have somewhat, ever since slavery, still been restricted to the same places. So either black people are in these points right here, which is Cleveland, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, Chicago, Indianapolis, St. Louis, San Francisco. All of these places have high black populations. Everywhere else is a very low black population. New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Buffalo, New York. You know what I'm saying? All of these places have high black populations from the Great Migration. Other places were, of course, in the South. You know what I'm saying? So all of these other places were, the South too. A lot of people, for whatever strange reason, don't consider, or there was a Baltimore as well too. Thank you. Exactly, Baltimore. Okay. As you can see, the thing, it was a lot of people in Baltimore. Some people, for whatever strange reason, there was a thing online where people were not considering Florida to be considered the South, but Florida is very much considered the South. Florida is very much a southern state. All of these places where it's kind of beige, all of these states that are beige were southern states, are considered to be southern states. All right. So getting that off, this is where the Great Migration was. It wasn't nowhere outside. We weren't fleeing to another country. It was still in the US. So we literally, the country we built, and I just went through we've been through the whole 45 minutes essentially discussing how we built everywhere in America. Even when you go to the West, when you talk about the East, when you talk about Los Angeles and stuff like that, it was a lot of the enslaved Black people in the gold mines and all that stuff with the gold rush on all that, you know. It was a lot of that when they did the what was that thing called, the transcontinental railroads that they give a lot of the Asians the credit for. That was a lot of that being done with Black people as well too. So everywhere in the United States of America was embedded with slavery, was founded with slavery. All right. So there was nowhere in America, nowhere in America you could go to, a FBA could go to, that essentially their people didn't build. Either their people built it directly through slavery, or the wealth that was generated through slavery was the foundation that was needed to build that city up anyway. You know what I'm saying? So you going from one place that your people built to another place that your people built is not fleeing. It's the same country. So the same government, the same constitution. The United States Constitution doesn't change when you move from Mississippi to Detroit. You know, the same person who's the president of the United States when you're in Mississippi is going to be the same person who's the president when you move to Detroit or when you move to Chicago. The same person who's the president when you're moving from Arkansas and when you move to New York or Baltimore is going to be the same person. It's the same government. If you're a citizen of the government, you're the same. It's the same. We didn't abandon our citizenship to become a citizen of someplace else. That's not what happened. The same, even though, you know, they didn't want us to be citizens, when we were considered citizens of the United States of America at 1865, we were considered citizens of the entire country. So anywhere we went, we were already a citizen. We're not an immigrant in a country that we were already a citizen in. That's literally the definition. All right. So to discuss, we got to break all that stuff down. Then now we're going to go to point number 3. The purpose was for economic opportunity, not to escape racism. A lot of people are talking about there was sanctuary and all that stuff in these places. There was absolutely no sanctuary in the northern states. I just earlier discussed how the northern states were just as brutal as the southern states were. A lot of people talk about the brutality of the southern states because a lot of that was very much so documented. Most of the slaves were in the southern states because that's where the plantations were, especially during the cotton boom. That's where a lot of the slaves were. They even moved a lot of the slaves to the south when the cotton started to really blow up. There was no sanctuary in the north, though. It was just that the northern brutality was less documented than the southern brutality was because a lot of the slaves were concentrated in the southern states because of the plantations. There was no escaping slavery. And our people did not have the concept of, man, slavery is so bad. Jim Crow was so bad out here. We got to flee to these other places to escape it. I just explained to you how in Chicago, you had the black codes or the black laws that was embedded in the city, in the laws in the city. It was legally on paper until 1865. So the same laws that restricted the slaves in the South are the exact same laws that restricted the slaves or black people in general, whether they were slaves or not slaves, in the North. The same, you got to be 3 or less in the South. That same rule in the South was the same rule they had in New York, in Chicago, in DC, in Detroit, all of that. So it was not an attempt to escape anything. There was no escaping anything. You could not escape racism. Nobody was attempting to do that. Nobody had the delusion that racism was gone. The slaves were looking like, okay, to leave the plantation, especially after the Civil War, there's not a lot of money left in the South. The North is what's having all of these factories and these industries and these plants. The automobile industry that was booming in the North, the steel industry, even a postal service, and we're going to get to that later. All of these transportation systems and all that was concentrated in the North. The North had a lot of jobs. So that's moving on to my very next point right here. Okay, the Great Migration was beneficial to the country. Hold on, let me the Great Migration was beneficial to the country. And the difference with that is that it's not like, oh my God, we need a savior. Oh my God. Well, what are we going to do? We need so much help and all that. No, there was, and I'm going to show it to you guys now, because we're going to have 100, we're going to be very sharp after this. Okay. The history is going to be very, very clear after this. Now, around the time when the Great Migration was going on, historians somewhat debate on the beginning of it, but a lot of people say that was around 1910. So if you notice, or if you guys know the history of that, it was a lot of the World War I happened 4 years after what they claim the beginning of what did I just say? The Great Migration. My bad. I'm sitting up there looking this stuff up. Now, look at this. So when we say slavery built the country, it literally did. Labor during World War I. Now, just because there was labor during World War I and World War I started necessarily in 1914, the fighting was going on prior to 1914, and they had a labor shortage because America was helping them. All right. It says at the height of World War I, labor became a huge need. This was in the early 1900s. Labor became a huge need, particularly in the war industry. All right. And all of the factories and stuff like that was manufacturing the stuff for war were in the North. So a lot of what happened in the North, they needed more labor. And the only way they really won World War I was because of the labor from the FBAs coming from the South. It continues to say, at the time, African Americans were migrating from the South to the North for better living and working conditions. Many of them found labor in manufacturing, automobile, and food industries. African Americans who enlisted in the Army were attached to a lot of labor battalions and units that were in charge of road work, digging holes, transportation, supplies overseas, particularly in France. Now, when we go right here, government employees, it says, let me see if I can zoom it in just a tad bit more. If I can zoom it in just a tad bit more. Okay. All right. It says, during World War I, the United States was under the administration of President Woodrow Wilson. Although he never issued an executive order during his 8 years in office, segregation became the de facto practice in many government agencies. During this time, African Americans experienced more discrimination than before in the federal government, as job applications started to require photos of potential employees. Okay. Damn, I clicked the wrong thing. Hold on, my bad, y'all. I got off this. Okay. So this was in the early 1900s. So and in the work we did actually in the war. It was really because of foundational Black Americans that we won the war in the first place, if we're going to be very, very honest. It continues to say, like every other military conflict in the United States history, African American volunteered and participated in droves to fight for their country. During the Great War, military units remained segregated, and many Black troops did not participate in combat duty. They like to say that because they like to give all the credit to the white dudes and everything like that. They always say that. Well, Black people was in the wars, but they weren't really fighting in the wars. No, that's not true. And a lot of that, they like to say things like, well, because Black people weren't experienced combatants. That's not correct. That's not correct either, because in the Civil War, they were losing the Civil War until Black soldiers started fighting against the Confederacy in the Civil War. That's the only reason why they won the Civil War in the first place. That's the reason why they won the Revolutionary War in the first place. The first person to die to really set the Revolutionary War off was Crispus Attucks, who was Black, was a foundation Black American. So they always kind of throw in a little untruth with that. Even though there was a lot of Black soldiers who were doing like the sweeping and the mopping, the Black people were not volunteering by the hundreds of thousands to sweep and mop the ship. So let's just be very honest about that. All right. It continues to say, instead of being given the opportunities to fight on the front lines, really? Okay. Many units were relegated to support duties, including Birchery companies, Stevendore labor battalions, and infantry companies. The notable exception were the 316th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters, who served on the front lines with the French Army. Going down. Now, this is the civic labor. Now, this was actually outside of America, but look at this right here. It's civilian labor. A tremendous drive of the Great Migration was the massive labor shortage created by men enlisting to serve in World War I. It wasn't a lot of men enlisted necessarily because there was still the draft going on at the time. So if you were an able-bodied male, you were just getting drafted, unless you were rich enough to pretty much pay your way out, to be very honest. You were pretty much being drafted if you were above the age of 18 years old. And in some cases younger, with your parents' permission. You were being drafted, so you didn't really have a choice. But because of that, and I'm saying this to say, because of that, there was a massive labor shortage. America needed the citizens. America needed a lot of people to work in the North. So it's not like Black people were going to the North, getting on their hands and knees and begging for jobs. They were actually sending letters to Southern places to be all like, hey, we need a lot of help up here in the North, okay? Because we can't be sending these men out to war and then we don't have nobody to work in the North and in these factories and industries, okay? So there was a big labor shortage, all right? So that's why a lot of the Great Migration did help, first off, win World War I, and it helped the country because it was very expensive. So because of the Great Migration and the enslaved or the previously enslaved Black people moving up to the North, that was able to keep the economy in America from completely freezing, because those jobs still needed to be worked. So because of the fact that the American economy was still going on, because of the Great Migration, America was able to afford fighting in the war. That's number one. And then number two, America was able to a degree recover after the war. All right. So we have to understand the history in its proper context. And then it says African Americans resettled in the North and West to find higher quality and higher paying jobs for a better life. All right. So we're talking about America, the job shortage. Talking about the job shortage. That's point number 4. So all of these points add up. All of them. But that's not it. Remember when we were talking about the trains and the early things in the train. So check this out. If I can find it, I got too many tabs open. But check this out. This is a lot. When we say we built this country, we don't even necessarily mean exclusively through picking cotton and through slavery. We mean every aspect, even the aspects of the country after slavery. All right. This is through the 1920s through the 1940s. Opportunity vary by city. Okay. It says a city where a Negro does not have to contend for the rights. Okay, now we're gonna go down through here. We're gonna start right here, y'all. It says beginning around 1916, which was still during the Great Migration. That's still during the Great Migration. In what has been termed the Great Migration, hundreds of thousands of African Americans left the South in search of a better life in the northern U.S. cities. African Americans moved not only to escape discrimination. Now, of course, they're going to put that spin. You couldn't escape discrimination. You were not escaping discrimination. I just previously read to you that they still had discrimination during World War I because a lot of the job applications, let me just pause it for a second. What they did, a lot of the job applications, what they would do is, until very, very recently, I even remember a time when you had to actually go to an establishment, take out a piece of paper and sign your job application. You would have to sign a job application and leave it at the establishment. But what they started to do was they would take the job applications and then they would say, okay, well, now we need a photo ID. And this was during World War I under President Wilson. So there was no escaping discrimination. Because they were still being discriminated in the North. And we're going to get into that. They like to say they were escaping discrimination. Point number, what was that point number? That was point number 3. There was no discrimination to escape. They were doing that for economic opportunities, which did help the country too. So it's not like anybody was handing anything to the black people. All right. So let's just be very clear about that. Okay. Talking about escaping discrimination, the race. Do you know how many race riots popped off in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, especially right after the World War I? One of the biggest race riots in America in 1919 in Chicago. Okay, so there was no escaping racism or discrimination. Let's just be very, very, very honest. Let's tell the history in its proper context. So it continues to say, after the whole escape discrimination from the South, but also in search of economic opportunities. Manpower shortages caused by World War I were opening up jobs in the North, while crop failures in the South were eliminating jobs. So let's be very clear. This goes to point number 4. The Great Migration benefited the United States country. We weren't sitting up there asking for anybody. Nobody was handing jobs and opportunities to us out of pity. They needed people to work these jobs, okay? In government, in the postal service, in all of that. That it was very necessary, especially during World War I. Had Black Americans not did the Great Migration and left the South and went to the North and worked all these different jobs, the American economy would have slowed down, if not completely froze. America would not have been able to afford the war. America was only really barely able to afford it, but America wouldn't be able to afford the war, and America would have essentially been destroyed, left bankrupt, had it not been for us maintaining that and fighting the war at the same time. All right. So we have to tell the history in its proper context. It continues to say, northern cities swelled with new immigrants, both southern-born blacks and foreign-born whites. Between 1910 and 1920, Philadelphia's black population rose by 58%. New York's by 64%, Chicago by 143%, and Detroit's by 613%. These were some of the biggest places where the Great Migration was. All right. So it was a flood of them coming over. Okay. Especially in Chicago and in Detroit. It says in 1920s, the black population of New York and Chicago more than doubled again. All right. So this was in so it was a bunch of them coming over, which was very necessary. And then it doubled again. In Detroit, more than tripled. All right. It says post offices were an important source of employment for the urban African American. By 1929, African Americans comprised nearly 20% of the postal workforce in Philadelphia and nearly 24% in Baltimore. The percentage of African American employees in Washington, D.C. post office grew from about 24% in 1925 to 35% by 1931. So within 6 years, it went damn near 10 percent points in Washington, D.C. Black people, foundational Black Americans were a huge part of the Postal Service in America. Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys a little something personal. My great grandmother used to work at the Postal Service. It's a lot of Black people who there's almost 200 people in this chat room. There's probably a bunch of you guys who have family members or even yourself who have worked in the Postal Service to some degree. All right. Even if y'all don't know, y'all could probably do some research and find it, because that was a big thing, and it was very necessary, because the Postal Service was how communication was getting around from everywhere in America. Then it says Harry S. New, Postmaster General, from 1923 to 1926. 1929, promised that federal hiring would be colorblind, Lord. Okay. But it was not a promise he could keep. Yeah, somebody said we actually did invent the Postal Service. We were some of the earliest people even doing that. Do you guys know the mailbox? Let me pause it just to get you guys a little bit of history. Do you know the mailbox was invented by a foundational Black American? Back in the day, postal services, the mail, they have a post office. There was no individual mail that was going on. People didn't have that. That wasn't even a thing at all until like the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, you had a post office, and everybody would have to go to the post office and stand in lines, give their address, or if they had boxes, they would have to unlock the boxes, and they would have to get the mail that was sent to the postal service. Okay. People didn't even have mailboxes, so you didn't have a mailman going to individual houses. You had people traveling from countries going to the post office. You had people working at the post office organizing the different mails from the different addresses. Okay, then later on you had addresses where people were going to different addresses, and then later on you had zip codes to make things more clear. So it's a lot of history to that. And a lot of the earlier people, which were called mail carriers, who were carrying the mail and were sending the mail from different states and stuff like that to the post office, were foundational Black Americans in the 1800s. This is even before the Civil War. All right. So it's important for us to understand this history. So where was I? Let me find it. Okay. We might as well start over from right here. Harry S. New, Postmaster General, from 1926 to 1929, promised that federal hiring would be colorblind. but it was not a promise he could keep. Although the Postmaster General stated the principles were put into practice. Principles were put into practice, all right? Or not by local postmasters, okay? So on the federal level, the discrimination in the post office was abolished, but then on the local level, it wasn't. All right, there was still a lot of discrimination. Racial discrimination persisted in both the hiring and promoting of workers, even at the nation's capital. Although the proportion of African Americans working at the Washington, D.C. post office in 1928 was on par with their representation in the general population, which shows you how many of them were actually working at the post office. They were overrepresented in low-level positions, with about 85% working as laborers and watchmen, and only about 15% in a higher paying clerical force. All right. In 1930 in Chicago, African Americans comprise about 70% of the post office laborers, 20% of the clerks, and 16% of the letter carriers, but only 5% of the foremen. And the foreman was like a really high, that was like the higher position, right? All right. It says so it was a whole bunch of them, and they were doing a lot of like the heavy lifting and the low paying jobs, but they were very, very necessary, especially during that time, because this is around the time when America was really starting to recover from World War I, which ended in 1918, and this was a couple years prior to the Great Depression. All right. Then it continues to say, Southern post offices, meanwhile, had a worse record of discrimination. So I just talked about Chicago. We talked about DC. These are places that foundational Black Americans went for the Great Migration. All right. So that means there was no escaping discrimination. I just told you in 1930 in Chicago, there was still a whole bunch of discrimination. There was still a whole bunch of discrimination in Washington, D.C. Nobody, and this is point number 4, nobody was escaping, or I'm sorry, this is point number 3. Nobody was escaping racism. You could not escape racism in America. People are going for employment that the country really, really desperately needed at the time, because that was the only way to keep the country from flowing and not completely crashing, especially dealing with a world war. And this is really after trying to recover from the Civil War, which ended in the late 1800s. So they were still kind of recovering from the Civil War in the 1800s, starting to kind of get their feet back up. And then not too long after that, there was World War I. So they really needed a lot of those jobs. So that goes into point number 4, that the Great Migration was beneficial to the country. All right. Let me see, where were we? It says, although the proportion of African American, no, I already read that part. It says, in the mid 1930s, 80% of the letter carriers in Memphis and 75% of the letter carriers in Houston were Black. But there were no postal clerks. There were no Black postal clerks in either city. Some Southern post offices passed over Black applicants entirely. Okay. So this goes to the point that there was a lot of discrimination in the Postal Service, but the Postal Service was very, very much so needed. All right. Then we're going to continue. We're not going to read the entire thing, but we're going to continue a lot with this, because this is the history that's going to make us very sharp when we're dealing with the dominant society and a lot of the lies that they tell. Look at this. Look at this picture right here. This is the post office picture. You see Black people and white people working at the post office, and this is in 1926. This was in the right during the Great Migration, during that time. All right. So we weren't coming over just being shoe shiners or whatever the case is. The black people were coming over working very necessary and important jobs that the country really needed at the time. Okay. We're going to actually go right here because this is just a quote. Employees were sometimes not only assigned to different types of work depending on their race, but also to different rooms, different sections of some different rooms. As late as 1949, the New Orleans Post Office maintained segregated swing rooms or break rooms, which was what they used to call break room swing rooms, okay, or break rooms for employees. As late as 1955, many post offices in Alabama, including those in Birmingham, Montgomery, shout out to Montgomery, shout out to the family in Montgomery, much respect, and Mobile, all of these places in Alabama, maintained segregated swing rooms and toilets. These were when the black people and white people couldn't go to the same bathroom. In the 1940s, a sting of executive orders battled racial discrimination in the federal workplace. All right. That's when in November, President Franklin, he signed an executive order eliminating photograph requirement for civil service applications. So what was happening, why he did that, because what was happening was that they needed a lot of people, and a lot of people were being overlooked just because they were black, even though they were qualified. And a lot of the post office workers, they were hiring people and then later on figuring out that they were black. So they were all like, okay, to get rid of that, because they still were pro-segregation, to get rid of that, what they did was they said, okay, well, now you need an ID. We need a picture of you in your application. And then when the picture came back, you know what I'm saying, and they saw, oh, you're black? Okay, we're just going to throw this away. So what Franklin Roosevelt did in 1940, because of all of the discrimination and all that stuff, signed an executive order to be all like, okay, you can't ask for a photo ID in the application for the post office. So that ended that discrimination as far as that was concerned. But I'm saying this to say it was no escaping racism. There was absolutely no escaping. It was necessary. The country needed it. The country couldn't maintain anything without it, especially fighting World War I in the early because America really actually didn't get into World War I as far as sending soldiers there until April in 1970, okay, and then it ended in 1980. All right. And then after that, during the 1930s, that's when the Great Depression was there, and they needed a lot of people were being unemployed. A ton of people were being unemployed. A lot of banks closed and everything like that. And they were starting to recover the economy. And then bam, around the 1940s, that's when World War II happened. So they were really just recovering from the World War I, okay, and then the Great Depression. And then bam, right after that, they went into World War II. So they needed a lot of the black soldiers in World War II. And also that they still needed a lot of the workers, but they needed more soldiers in World War II than they did in the first one. That's when a lot of the women were working at the telecommunications and all that stuff. That's when you saw a surge of the women doing that. Okay. So we understand the history, and we have to understand that. All right, so that's point 4. So point 5, right? There was no aid given in the Great Migration. So when I say there was no aid given, I mean for the fact that we have a lot of them coming over here, these asylum seekers, these migrants, we have a lot of them coming over here. They're coming over, they're getting free places to stay. They're not paying any rent. They're getting free places to stay. They're getting free food, phones, clothes, Wi-Fi. They're given preferential treatment when it comes to employment, when it comes to schools, when it comes to all of that stuff. They're getting preferential treatment. In the South, they were not doing that. I mean, in the Great Migration, I'm sorry. They were not doing any of that. the only support America, Foundation Black Americans were getting in the Great Migration was through other Foundation Black Americans. That's why you saw a lot of the Great Migration. It took a long period of time because it wasn't like the entire family was sent to one place. Like you didn't ship the whole family to New York. You didn't ship the whole family to Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, or anything like that. They were sending individuals. All right. So it was like, okay, you take the younger crew, you guys go work at the factory, you guys pay, you guys kind of get your foot wet a little bit in these cities, and then you will send for your cousin, for your auntie, for all of these other people. So there was Foundation Black Americans created a bridge essentially from the South to the North for their families. Okay, that's why you have a lot of us have a large set of families who are still in the South, and they were sending other family members to the North when the job shortages were necessary. And a lot of the Black people who had somewhat of land in the South, farms or anything, businesses in the South, they maintained that. And the only refuge the people in the Great Migration had was essentially going back down to the South. And that's why a lot of them didn't all go to the North at one point in time, because they were sending people to the North to get the foundation for the family so they can start coming more to the North. But in case like, because there was a lot of employment discrimination, and I just showed you, and that's the reason why I showed you guys that in the post office, there was a lot of employment discrimination in the North, even though there was a job shortages, because when dealing with white supremacy, they'll cut their nose to spite their face. So dealing with that, there was a lot of discrimination. So sometimes they had to like go back to the South and kind of recover. You know what I'm saying? So that's why the South and the North, the Southern FBA family and the Northern FBA family were very connected as far as the Great Migration was concerned. But coming to the North, it's not like coming here, you're getting preferential treatment. I just showed you guys for decades, even though there was a job shortage, there was still job discrimination. So you weren't coming over getting any type of preferential treatment. You weren't coming getting any type of housing assistance, education assistance. You weren't getting any food stamps. You weren't getting any of that coming to the North. Essentially, we are the people who had to get it out the mud. Now, you have a whole bunch of migrants who will come over to America and they'll say things like, my family came over with nothing. My family came over with the clothes on their backs. That's not really what, if anything, it was foundational Black Americans who embodied that concept. We're the people who literally came over. You literally had a bag of, literally, it was a lot of them. You had a bag of clothes and a little bit of money. The Southern family, they was all like, hey, all we can give you is this little bit of money so you can kind of get a couple, stay in a hotel or a little bit so you can get this job, so you can kind of get this foundation in the North. So they had a bag of, literally a bag of clothes and a little bit of money, a little bit of personal items, watches, or whatever the case is. They literally had the clothes on their back when they went to the North. They weren't coming over here already established at all. But they came over because it was necessary. So the whole my family came over with $5, my family came over with nothing. That's us. Y'all, they didn't come over with that. That would be us. All right. That's all of us. So we have to be very, very honest about that. We didn't come over with any type of aid. It was actually a lot of discrimination coming to the North because the union, which was really established to be and to kind of help the white man in the workplace, the union had a lot of different unions and stations in the North, right? So white folks in the North did not like the fact that Black people who were more skilled, who could work longer hours, who were more essentially intelligent, better workers, they didn't like the fact that they were coming over essentially stealing the jobs in the North, they didn't like that fact. So that's why a lot of the tension was going on, and that's why they were hollering at their unions like, hey, there's too many black people coming from the South stealing these jobs. And at the same time too, you had a lot of white Europeaners who are coming to northern cities. That's why in Chicago you got a whole bunch of Polish Europeans. In Chicago you have a whole bunch of Irish. In Chicago, Italian, you got a whole Italians in New York and all of these other places. So you had the Great Migration going from the southern states to the northern states, and then you had Europeans fleeing their country from Europe and coming to America. And this was all really at the same time. And that's why a lot of the Europeans were getting that kind of like the nigger treatment before they acclimated into white, because a lot of the Europeans who were coming over, even though they were not discriminated as severely as the black people coming from the South, they were still kind of discriminated. They were not considered white necessarily. That's why a lot of the Italians had to commit a bunch of crimes with the mafia and Al Capone in Chicago and all of that stuff. That was during around the same time, because they were being discriminated to a lesser degree, but they were being discriminated as well too. And then they became considered white on the census, and then the discrimination ended as far as they are concerned. All right. So all of this stuff was happening at the same time. So none of this stuff counts as fleeing. Everybody else, quite literally, every other group of people counts as fleeing. The Europeaners, people from outside everybody from outside the country counts. Because why? Because foundational Black Americans, we did not leave a country to go to another country, to go to a better country. That didn't happen. Okay. When you immigrated to this country, whether it was from South America, whether it was from Africa, whether it was from Europe, what you had to do is you had to take the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, actually, let me pull this up. I got a whole bunch of stuff pulled up. Pledge of Allegiance. All right. I'll pull this up. I'm just trying to find it. Okay, look. Now we're going to actually discuss the Pledge of Allegiance and how that is a part of fleeing. Right here. Okay. Now, ignore the ads. I hate the ads, man. I hate the ads. But it says, right, you guys see it? Hold on, let me see. Okay, y'all can see it. The Pledge of Allegiance was written in August 1892 by the socialist minister Francis Bellary. Okay, that's 18. Now he died in 1900. It don't matter. Okay, it was originally published in the Youth Champion on September 8th, 1982. Okay, so this is what it reads, and we're saying this because all of this stuff adds up. All right, quote right here. Quote: I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, excuse me, I'm gotta take a one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In 1923, the words "the flag of the United States of America" was added. At this this is around the time when a lot of the Europeans were coming over. Okay, it was added at this time. Now it said this was the pledge that they were taking. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So when you come to America and you're pledging allegiance, we have to tell the full truth with that. When you come to America and you pledge allegiance to the American flag, what that means is that your allegiance is to this nation and to the flag in which this nation stands and represents. That literally by definition means that you are abandoning your previous nation. You are abandoning your other flag, whatever nation you already come from. we as foundational Black Americans, we are quite literally the only group of people who have not abandoned one nation to become citizens of the United States of America. That's either true or it's not true. There's no middle area. There's no debate. We're the only group of people, because we built the country in the first place. All of these other people have left some, whether it was from Europe, whether it's from South America or wherever, they're pledging allegiance. They're saying my allegiance is to this nation, not to my nation of origin. We're the only group of people who have not done that. We have only moved within our own nation, the nation that we spent all this time establishing, that we built. So we're the only group of people, by definition, who are not fleers. You cannot flee in the nation that you built, in your own nation. That's quite literal. That the concept of that is literally like if you have a house and you move to another house in the same neighborhood, you're fleeing the neighborhood. No, I'm not fleeing the neighborhood. I'm not an immigrant of the neighborhood. I moved from one block to another block for whatever reason, but it doesn't matter, because that doesn't count as fleeing. Okay, what counts as fleeing is you have a country, you have a government, you have a nation, and you have a flag. You leave that and you pledge allegiance to another country, another government, another nation, and another flag to become a citizen of that. That is quite definition. That is literally the definition of fleeing. So when they say things like, "Oh, these asylum seekers, these migrants, they're coming over here," but it's the same concept as the Great Migration. You guys fled from the South, right? So technically, that's the same thing we're doing. We're fleeing from the South of America, so we're free. No. By the 5 points, and I'm gonna put it up here. I got this right up here. So you guys, if you guys wanted to take a damn screenshot, you guys get your screenshots on game. If you wanted to take a screenshot, you can take a screenshot of the 5 points. I just moved the logo of the 5 points that make what we did in the Great Migration completely 110% different from fleeing. It does not at all, under any circumstance, by the definition, count as fleeing because of these points. We're going to review it real quick. Point number 1, slavery built the entire country, not only the South. There was slavery in New York. There was slavery in Chicago. There was slavery in Detroit, Michigan. There was slavery all over the place. Even in the places that quote unquote abolished slavery, they still had laws where you could not testify as a black person against a white person. So what that means is that they could technically just kidnap you and force you into working, and you couldn't do anything because you can't testify against them. So slavery was quite literally everywhere. And even if the certain places didn't have slavery, the wealth of the nation, every single place in America still had the wealth tied to the nation. All right. So slavery built the entire country. Number 2, the Great Migration was under the U.S. government. We did not flee anywhere else. We did not go anywhere else. Let me show you a map. Let me bring up the map again. Okay. This is the map of the Great Migration. All right. The map of the Great Migration. It doesn't say Canada. It doesn't say Mexico. It's not Europe. It's not Africa. It's not the Caribbean. It's none of that. All right. These are only places in America that we've already built any damn way. These are places in America. Okay. So we didn't leave one nation. We didn't have to take a pledge of allegiance. When you didn't take a pledge of allegiance leaving Georgia to go to New York, because it's under the same nation. It's under the same country. All right. So let's just be very, very clear with that. If you guys need to take a screenshot of the map too, you guys can go ahead and do that. All right. So, going back to the point, okay, that was point number 2. Point number 3, the purpose was for economic opportunities, not to escape racism. Black people in the South were very well aware of all of the racism in the North. Okay, we're very, very, very clear with that. That's why all of the race riots in the North and stuff like that were popping off. Okay, black people were not unaware of racism in the North. It's not like there was not Jim Crow in the North as well too. It's not like there was not a white water fountain and a black water fountain in the North as well too. But the thing is that the North needed jobs, and they had jobs. Okay, they had economic opportunities that black people were seizing. No, point number 4, the Great Migration was beneficial to the entire country. Okay, especially during World War One, recovering from World War One. Okay, getting ready for World War Two and recovering from World War Two. All right, America needed people to work those jobs. They desperately needed people to work those jobs. In the post office, a lot of people were in the factories, in the automobile factory, in the factories that were making furniture and merchandise, guns. A lot of they were working in those factories, on the assembly line and stuff like that. Those were jobs that were very needed because there was a work shortage. Oh, I'm sorry, a labor shortage. Okay. It was a work surge and a labor shortage. So they needed the black people from the Great Migration. All right. Point number 5. There was no aid given in the Great Migration. That means that you didn't go from Mississippi and go to Chicago, or from Arkansas and go to Detroit and get some type of government aid. You were not given any government checks. You were not giving any housing assistance. People were discriminating against you in housing. Okay. People were discriminating against black folks in schools. People were discriminating against black people in jobs. Okay. So black people left the South and were going to the North, but not getting any aid. The only aid, only aid black people ever had was their black family that was back in the South. That's the only sort of aid black people had. That's quite literally it. And to be totally honest, there was not too much aid when it comes to that being concerned, because the South was kind of poor, and it was economically, it wasn't that flourishing, especially right after the Civil War. So we have to be very, very clear with that. So all of these lies that they'll tell a whole bunch of lies. They'll tell a whole bunch of lies. Let me show you another thing about aid that you guys might not have known. Do you know house parties? Do you know house parties was invented by foundational Black Americans? House parties was invented because house and rent parties, okay? Because black people in housing, and this goes to point number 5, in housing, black people would have to pay higher mortgage rates. They would have to pay higher rent rates, okay? In place, especially in New York, right? They would have to pay that stuff, right? So what they would do is that a whole bunch of black people would gather together and have a party, and a party would essentially be a fundraiser. And it would be black people. Some black people would be selling, like, merchandise, clothes, and other black people would be playing music and stuff like that. So it was really a fundraiser that foundational Black Americans did to help other foundational Black Americans afford their living in these cities because of all of the discrimination that they were facing. Okay. And then that turned into house parties and stuff like that. Okay, where people were starting not only to do that, but a lot of that stuff, that's when people started to bring in a lot of the food and stuff like that. Like, if they didn't have any money necessarily to help out and contribute, they would, we have some canned goods, we have some baby clothes, whatever you might need, or whatever the case is, they would bring that in to donate. All right. So that goes to point number 5. There was no aid. We had to literally look out for each other. These other people, these migrants, asylum seekers, they're coming over here and they're sitting up there the government is paying for them. That was not at all the case when it came to us. Nobody's putting $1 million tents up when it came to black people. Nobody's doing that in recent modern time. So it's not the same to any degree, to any iota at all. Not at all. It was not the same. All right. So let's be very, very true with that. Okay, exactly. Selling pies. That's a lot of black people were selling pies and cakes and stuff like that, cookies and all that stuff. Let's tell the truth about it. All right, we always had to look out for each other. We were the only people looking out for each other. Okay, so it was black people in the North trying to work together to maintain their living, and then black people from the South, supporting, and then black people from the North sending money back to the South or sending for relatives to come to the North. So it was a lot of that going on. All right. Exactly. Somebody brought up the free breakfast program. The free breakfast program that was started by the Black Panther Party. So we got to be honest. We're the ones who are always looking out for each other. It was not the other way around. Nobody was looking out. The government especially was not looking out for black people. It wasn't. So those are the 5 points that make the Great Migration and the other thing very, very different. Now, I said last week that I went to the city hall, and I was speaking on, because they were talking about the budget. So I literally went to the budget meeting, and I was all like, hey, y'all doing this for them. Y'all need to pay us reparations. So for the first time, let me get my logo back up. I was like, why does this feel so naked? It feels naked without the logo. Get my logo back up. For the very first time, you guys are going to see, and I haven't posted this anywhere else. For the very first time, you guys are going to see me at the city hall meeting. I signed up. I was a speaker and everything at the city hall meeting, speaking on reparations. I was really trying to be civil. I was trying not to get like too aggressive, because I didn't want people to remix what I had to say. But let me show it to you guys. Oh, hold on, let me bring that back.
You may proceed.
Okay. I just want to say that Black Americans have built the United States of America through slavery, through the wealth, the railroads, all of that started from slavery, started with enslaved Black people. Okay. We have been the ones who have fought in every war, saved America in every single crisis, and have yet to be paid our due, yet to be paid reparations. Chicago, the city of Chicago, is currently gentrifying Black residents. And the ones that are not being gentrified are struggling to pay their bills, or to choose to either pay utilities or to put food on the table. And now we have a whole bunch of other people, migrants coming over here that are unvetted. We don't know them, committing crimes, and that's been documented. And they're coming over here and they're getting checks, they're getting money, they're getting food, they're getting housing. There's been dozens for decades of Black homeless people, hundreds of Black homeless people sleeping outside under bridges, behind garbage cans, eating out of the garbage. Nobody's done anything for them. Now they are coming over here, these people that nobody knows, and America is setting up tents, spending millions of dollars for tents. Or you have Black Americans over here struggling to pay their rent, struggling to keep their utilities on, struggling to put their kids in school, struggling to do anything. So the city of Chicago needs to allocate money that is owed to Black Americans, the ones that built this country. There would be no city of Chicago. There would be no America. There would be nothing had it not been for these people and their descendants. So the city of Chicago owes that debt to those people. The city of Chicago needs to pay reparations, needs to allocate their budget for reparations for Black Americans specifically. They do it with every other crisis. Every other group of people who come over here, there's money all of a sudden for them. And when it comes to us, then it's a vote, it's a budget, it's a poll, it's waiting. Dr. Martin Luther King said, justice delayed is justice denied. And as far as Black Americans are concerned, we're always the one put at the back of the line, always the one filtered last. We're always the one who are the most denied. And that needs to change. Change can happen. If we want the country to be a better country, we want this country to grow and be the country that we all claim we want it to be, then we need to start doing what is right by the people who have been done wrong the most, which is Black Americans. And that is by paying them reparations. Okay, the city of Chicago owes these people something. The city of Chicago pays everybody else and looks out for everybody else, people who have not done anything at all to deserve it. So they need to pay the money to the people who actually deserve it and look out for the Black Americans in Chicago.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, I only had 3 minutes, y'all. I only had 3 minutes. I really had to think, like, damn, what can I say in these 3 minutes that really drives the point home? But I did what I could. I did what I could. And so many people, like, they were like, thank you. They said thank you a couple more times. They literally said, there was Black people who literally said thank you until I sat down. There was Black people sitting up there the second I left the room, because I was only there for a little bit of time. But the second I left the room, there was the security officers was shaking my hand like, damn, brother, I like what you had to say. There was people interviewing me. They was all like, hey, can I ask you a couple questions? Can I ask you a couple questions? People loved it. I was like, I'm gonna be there, and I'm gonna represent. Okay. Y'all sitting up there, giving them millions of dollars, setting up tents, setting up money, setting up all this stuff. Y'all don't do nothing for Black folks. Now, we just discussed how slavery was in Chicago. We already discussed this in this broadcast. And even if it wasn't, slavery built the country. Chicago is in America. Am I not correct? So slavery did build Chicago. If slavery was either in Chicago or wasn't, slavery still built Chicago. So Chicago needs to pay these people something. All right. We're not going to play this little game where it's all like, oh, this was a free slave. No, it really wasn't. All right. They need to pay something. Now, I'm at the city budget and I'm sitting up there talking to them and I'm all like, y'all talking about budgets for transportation. Y'all talk about budgets for immigrants. Y'all allocating budgets for people. In a previous broadcast, I already said they are unvetted. They don't know who they are. Okay, they're coming over here. They're not even being processed. You guys are still doing the processing, but you're giving them money in the meantime. You guys are not doing all of this stuff. I mean, you're doing all of this stuff incorrectly, illegally, and you got people over here struggling to pay rent, struggling to pay bills, struggling to put their kids through school, struggling to just live a decent life in a country that we built, and you sitting up there talking about the budget for everything else. We're not having that, okay? Y'all need to, I don't know what y'all need to do. If y'all need to have a conversation or a meeting or whatever the case is, and y'all need to put some stuff aside, y'all need to take some money out of something, whatever you got to do, find a way to do it. But y'all need to find a way to put some money in Black Americans' pockets. That's what y'all need to find a way to do, all right? And that doesn't just go for Chicago. That goes for everywhere. I was not playing with them. No. I was not playing. Let me get to some of the super chats because I know I missed some. Can I get more active on Facebook for us old folks? I got you. I got you. Because there is an audience who are more on Facebook than Twitter. So I do got to get more active on Facebook because I'm missing that audience, the Facebook audience. So I do got to get more active on that. And I appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much, Gigi. Another one from Tell It Like It Is, the 1999. Thank you very much. Or 999. Thank you very much. These other people never had to get it out the mud. That's why they rely on us to eat. Exactly. Precisely. These people, we're talk about getting it out the mud. Talking about getting it out the mud. How are you getting it out the mud when you're already going to a more established country? By definition, that's not possible. Oh, also shout out to Antithesis for the Cash App. Thank you very much for the Cash App. Okay. How are you getting something out the mud when you're leaving a country for a better country? You're leaving to a better country because you wouldn't be leaving if you thought the country was worse. You're leaving because you think the country is better in some way than the country you're living in now. Okay. PayPal, Zelle, all of my PayPal, Zelle, and all of that stuff is in the description below. It's all Afro Elite 10. It's Afro Elite 10 on PayPal, Zelle, all that stuff. All of that stuff. Can I play it again? I'm play it again. Yeah, I'll play it again. But my thing is that you're not leaving the country. and going to another, that's fleeing. You talk about getting it out the mud, you're going to a more established country that's actually giving you preferential treatment. We're the only ones who got anything out the mud. Europeans didn't. What Torian, our good brother Torian would say, the South of the Barbarians, they didn't. Okay, not even, and no diss, but not even the black people from the diaspora. Because y'all didn't come during the foundation of America. Y'all came after America was already established. And this isn't a diss to all of them, but it either happened or it didn't happen. That's the case. We're the only people who got anything out the mud, if we're going to be honest. Yeah, but let me play the clip again.
Okay. I just want to say that Black Americans have built the United States of America. Through slavery, through the wealth, the railroads, all of that started from slavery, started with enslaved Black people, okay? We have been the ones who have fought in every war, saved America in every single crisis, and have yet to be paid our due, yet to be paid reparations. Chicago, the city of Chicago, is currently gentrifying Black residents. And the ones that are not being gentrified are struggling to pay their bills or to choose to either pay utilities or to put food on the table. And now we have a whole bunch of other people, migrants coming over here that are unvetted. We don't know them, committing crimes, and that's been documented. And they're coming over here and they're getting checks, they're getting money, they're getting food, they're getting housing. There's been dozens for decades of Black homeless people, hundreds of Black homeless people sleeping outside under bridges, behind garbage cans, eating out of the garbage. Nobody's done anything for them. Now they are coming over here, these people that nobody knows, and America is setting up tents, spending millions of dollars for tents, while you have Black Americans over here struggling to pay their rent, struggling to keep their utilities on, struggling to put their kids in school, struggling to do anything. So the city of Chicago needs to allocate money that is owed to Black Americans, the ones that built this country. There would be no city of Chicago. There would be no America. There would be nothing had it not been for these people and their descendants. So the city of Chicago owes that debt to those people. The city of Chicago needs to pay reparations, needs to allocate their budget for reparations for Black Americans specifically. They do it with every other crisis.
Y'all know, I almost messed up right there. I said Black, and then I'm like, oh no, hold on, let me fix myself, because it's not just the Black people. It's specifically for us.
Every other group of people who come over here, there's money all of a sudden for them. And when it comes to us, then it's a vote, it's a budget, it's a poll, it's waiting. Dr. Martin Luther King said, justice delayed is justice denied. And as far as Black Americans are concerned, we're always the one put at the back of the line, always the one filtered last. We're always the one who are the most denied. And that needs to change. Change can happen. If we want the country to be a better country, we want this country to grow and be the country that we all claim we want it to be, then we need to start doing what is right by the people who have been done wrong the most, which is Black Americans. And that is by paying them reparations. Okay, the city of Chicago owes these people something. The city of Chicago pays everybody else and looks out for everybody else, people who have not done anything at all to deserve it. So they need to pay the money to the people who actually deserve it and look out for the Black Americans in Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Yeah. Straight up handling business. Shout out to Stay Positive for the Cash App. I appreciate that. It really does help. I just had to get new equipment and everything. And I'm so glad I got new equipment too, because the stream, I had a lot of stuff loaded up. So I needed this new equipment. It came in yesterday. I had to install it yesterday. So everything's going good. Yeah, I deliberately brought up that Dr. King quote. I'm all like, yeah, that's going to really put the nail in the coffin right there. You know what I'm saying? Because they used to reference Dr. King against us. Now I'm going to do it for them. You know what I'm saying? So ain't no waiting, because now they're going to talk about, oh, well, the next city budget is in 2024. No. Why should we have to wait to 2024? These immigrants, you don't know who they are. They don't have to wait to 2024 to get nothing. We can get something now, just like they're getting something now. We can get something now. Okay. We as citizens shouldn't have to wait longer than people who are not citizens. That's like going to a restaurant and you sitting up there waiting on the table, and then you have another person coming up there and say, hey, I want a table, same size table, and they say, oh, right away, sir, and then come over there, no reservation or anything. No, if we gotta wait, they gotta wait. If they don't gotta wait, we ain't gotta wait. We don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for nothing. Okay, talking about the next budget, something needs to happen now. Something needs to happen now. All right, we're not about to play that game. We're not about to play that game. All right, coming over with criminal records and everything. Man, shout out to. Let me see the other super chat. We got another super chat. Right when it pops up. Okay, there we go. There we go. Thank you, Mama Deb. Thank you for the $10 super chat. I greatly appreciate it. Much respect. Thank you very much. It says that's boots on the ground. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, because we needed people out there, not plebiscite babbling, not you know what I'm saying, not talking all this gibberish or whatever the case is. Somebody out there on business, standing on business. You know, which leads me to this thing. Y'all know we got the For the Culture thing popping up. We got that coming. So I gotta play the trailer. I gotta do it. So here we go.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest. They built land-grant colleges with government money. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Oh, it's coming, y'all. It's coming. Did y'all mark y'all calendars yet? I need to know. Did you mark your calendars? Because you got to mark your calendars, man. Clear your schedule. Call off work. Call in sick. Don't get what you got to do. You got to be there. You got to watch it. It's going to be something that is new, that is fresh, that has never, ever, ever been done before. You guys will not want to miss this. I'm trying to tell you guys right now. You got to mark your calendar. All right? It's going to be nothing. Okay, this is my last live stream before we do it, and I want to know what you guys think. Next time I pop on live, I need to know what you guys think. This Sunday, it's going down, all right? Hashtag for the culture. We got to start spreading that. We got to start talking about it. Tell your grandma, tell your mama, tell the people at work, unless, they white, you know what I'm saying? Because then they might, get upset and fire you or something like that. But don't get in trouble at your job. But everywhere else, all your family events, okay? Everything for the culture, man. Telling you, it's going to be like nothing you've seen before. Nothing you've seen before, brothers and sisters. Okay, I am tremendously excited. Shout out to Steven for the Cash App too. Thank you very much, brother Steven. I appreciate you. I tremendously do. Thank you so very much. Thank you everybody who's been here. We've had a very steady stream so far. A very, very steady stream. It's going to be very, very educational. Anytime they talk about using the Great Migration against us, you hit them with, let me pull it up one last time. You hit them with these points, these 5 points right here. Say, nope, these 5 points, explicitly show the difference between the Great Migration and what y'all losers are doing, which is fleeing. That's explicitly what it shows. All right. And that's not been done before. So anytime anybody says anything, bam, hit them with the facts. Just like that. And when you show them that list, they will not be able to say anything. That list is foolproof. That list, you can't beat it. There's no other way around it. We went through not only did we go through the points, we went through every single point, like brick by brick, essentially. Every point in detail, all right? You can't, this foolproof. This is foolproof, okay? Don't ever let them sit up there and try to manipulate the Great Migration and all that. Man, I wish, man. And they sit up there, they're not even citizens of this country talking about y'all did it, so why can't we? Why don't y'all build y'all country like that? If y'all want to emulate the Great Migration, why don't you build your own country in your own nation? How about that? How about that? Brothers and sisters, we spent a lot of game. We went through a lot of history, okay? We went through a lot of facts. And I showed you the clip of me in Chicago, sitting up there representing for the people. So this was a very, very loaded stream. I know it was a lot. I know you guys, it's a lot of information that I brought to you guys with this stream. So I thank you guys for being here with me. Also, listen, y'all, you should be following me on my various social media platforms. Now that's Afro Elite on Instagram and then the Afro Elite on Twitter. The links to that is in the description below. So you guys follow me. That way you guys stay updated with, the For the Culture podcast, all the details, the times, all that stuff. You guys stay updated with that. Also, please, we are so very close. And today is the first live of the month. We are 2 months away to the end of 2023. We got a little bit more to go. We can get to that. We can get there. We can get there, okay? We got a little bit more to go. It's going to be easy. You're going to be like nothing ever done before. So we need to shout out to L Boogie. I appreciate the cash app again. Thank you. Thank you very much. We need to get to that 10K. We got to do it. We have to do it, okay? It's a great accomplishment. So make sure you guys leave a like, okay? Make sure you guys subscribe and hit that notifications bell. Share this. Leave the comment, okay? Leave a comment on what you think about the Great Migration. What do you think about them using it against us? What do you think about any of the information you might have learned from this? Leave the hashtag for the culture. Okay, leave that in the comment section below. Below these comments, blow the likes up and all that stuff, because that really, really helps. All right. Man, so excited for you guys, brothers and sisters, man. I'm excited. But with that being said, my brothers and my sisters, be one salute to every single last one of you all, and you all have a good one.